Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kim and let's talk about apartment searching today. Number one is figuring out your budget range. And I say range because I think that everybody has an idea of how much that they want to spend on rent or what's feasible for them. I know when I moved from upstate New York to New York City, where cost of living was completely different. I had to really sit down with one of my friends who had actually lived in New York and, do a budget and really figure out, how much could I feasibly pay and rent off of the expected salary that I was going to make in New York. And it wasn't very much money, to be honest. And when I first moved there, my budget was super tight. But I managed to find something that did fit my budget. But not only that, I think the second thing is once you have your budget range, you have to figure out how it fits into the market. So when I moved to New York City, I think I was paying under $1,000. So maybe I think it was like $985 or something random for a one bedroom. And that it like blows my mind now because that was 10 years ago and I doubt you could even rent a closet for that at this point. And it was in Manhattan. It was in a very north neighborhood of Inwood, if you're familiar at all with New York City. And you would not be able to get that nowadays. So I think that if I were to move back to New York City, hypothetically, because I'm not by any means, I would look at my budget, those hypothetical $1,000, and try to figure out how it would fit into the market, nowadays. So again, really important to figure out your budget range and then how it fits realistically. You're not going to be able to find a apartment in downtown Chicago for $800, for example. If you're coming from a small town city and you want to move to Chicago, you really have to be realistic about what your budget is going to get you. And you could say that about any place that you're moving. What is realistically how far your dollar is going to go. So the second tip I have is figuring out your necessities versus your needs versus your wants. Those are three very different categories. So for me right now at the stage in my life and kind of what I'm looking for, so necessities, which is something that I absolutely have to have. It's a deal breaker if I don't work. So I don't want to walk more than 5 to 10 minutes to be able to get to either a bus or a train to get me to work. Another necessity would be a dishwasher. I know it's kind of a dumb thing, but I literally never had a dishwasher in my apartment until I moved to Chicago, and it was life-changing. And then I'm in my third apartment now. 2 out of the 3 have had dishwashers, and the one in the middle did not. And I can't even explain. It's so dumb, but I cannot even explain how much a dishwasher frees up my personal time and effort and what I'm willing to put in for doing dishes. So again, close to transit options and dishwashers are going to be my necessities, total deal breakers. My needs are going to be something that is below my necessities in terms of importance, but it's definitely going to go into pros or cons when I'm kind of deciding what apartment to take. So in my last video, if you watched that, I talked about how I went and I saw 2 different apartments and I listed out the pros and cons of each place and then ultimately which one I decided to go with. And some of the needs ended up, determining that factor. So for me right now, a need is having a lot of closet space. And then lastly would be your wants. So the things that you want but aren't necessarily deal breakers. For example, would be a balcony. So I would love a balcony. I think that that's a great amenity. Is it something that is absolute necessity, a deal breaker for me, or even a need? Probably not. Especially in Chicago, where realistically you're using your balcony 3 months out of the calendar year, when the weather is nice. Another example of a want would be a pool. So I've actually never lived anywhere with a pool. I just say that as an example because it's not a personal want of mine, but it would be for sure nice to have. So again, what are your necessities, your needs, and your wants? Second tip, figure that out and be really, really strict with yourself. Again, if you've done your research and you know what kind of places your hypothetical $800 in Chicago is going to get you, then you'll know that $800 in Chicago is most likely not going to get you that balcony and not going to get you, you know, maybe even a dishwasher. Third tip is getting a feel for the neighborhood. So this I think is really, really important, especially if you're moving to a new city that you're not super familiar with. I had visited Chicago a handful of times, maybe 3 or 4 times before I decided to move here. And I wasn't really familiar with a lot of the neighborhoods. I ended up moving. I initially wanted to move to the neighborhood that my friend lived in, that obviously because that's the one I was most familiar with. So when I would visit her from New York City, we would mostly hang out in the neighborhood that she lived in at that time, which was Lakeview. So when I moved to Chicago, I'm like, oh, I want to live in Lakeview. But I actually ended up living in Gold Coast, which is a little bit south and closer to downtown, just because I knew I would be working a ton, starting the new job that I was when I came here. So I ended up moving a little bit south. But it's really just important to get a feel for your neighborhood in terms of the demographics. You know, grocery stores are really big. I think maybe less now because there's things like, you know, Amazon Fresh and other food delivery places, but grocery stores I like to still have in proximity. Restaurants, if you're really into going out and ordering, what kind of restaurants are there in the neighborhood? And then gym facilities. Again, a lot of these things don't really apply right now because we're in a pandemic, but just thinking overall, big picture, those are things that I know are important to me where I live. So I think that you just have to figure out what are the things that you like to see in your neighborhood and then do the research to see. Number 4, and this is a really important one that I didn't necessarily know about, I think until I moved to Chicago, because I didn't have experience with this in previous apartments that I had lived in, either in upstate or in New York City, that one apartment in New York City. And that is, what utilities are included in the rent / is there a separate utility package? So what I mean by that, say you have your $800 that you're willing to pay for your rent. So are there any utilities included in that? Is your heat included, your electric, the cooking gas? A lot of places consider, you know, trash and, you know, water or utility. Are those all included, or is that something extra that you're going to have to pay? So the first apartment I lived in Chicago, I had my base rent, and then I also had I don't even know, I think it was maybe $75 utility package. So all those utilities that I just named, you know, the heat, the water, stuff like that, trash removal, that was not included in the base rent. So I had to factor that additional $75 or however much it was in with my rent. Now, a lot of places don't have separate utility packages. So the apartment that I'm in currently, the rent is $12.75, and I don't have a separate utility package. I do have to pay gas and electric, and then cable and internet, which are the most 2 common that are generally not included that I've found in all my searching. Under this kind of bucket about talking about utilities and just things like that, let's talk about what is the minimum income requirement for the building that you're applying to. Again, something that I never knew about prior to moving to New York City, but a lot of places, especially if they are owned by a big management company, will require you to have 3 times the rent in income. So if you have your $800, you need to make 3 times that amount. So what is that? $2,400? I don't do math. You have to have 3 times the $800 rent in income before taxes to be able to make that. I think it's generally a law in most places, and that's the standard amount that I've seen in all the apartments that I've looked for, is if you don't make 3 times that rent, you can apply, but you most likely won't get approved for that place. And then the other thing that you have to take into consideration when you want to move and you're apartment searching is what are the additional fees that you have to pay. So does the building or management company require a move-in fee? Do they require a first month's and last month's deposit? Do you have to pay an upfront pet fee? These are all things that can range from anywhere to an entire month of the rent to say $500 for a move-in fee. I had to pay, pet fees before. So a lot of different fees that you have to take into account when you're kind of budgeting out, can I afford this place? How much am I going to spend on the initial move-in process? So for example, the place that I am moving into 5 weeks from now, I had to pay an administration fee. I had to pay an upfront pet fee. I had to pay an application fee. And I think that was it. You have to think about all those type of things and ask those kind of questions about, what is the fees associated with moving into this apartment. So the fifth tip that I have is, what is the ideal time frame for searching? You're not going to be able to start apartment searching 6 months in advance. Like they don't even know what leases they'll have, apartments that they'll have available 6 months from now. About 6 to 4 weeks is a lot more accurate. If I'm moving June 1st, I'm really not looking until maybe the end of April and in May. And then that can cause a lot of anxiety for people. I know I'm the type of person that if I can get a lease locked in, 2 months prior to moving, I will. But a lot of places obviously don't want to have apartments, empty and not make that rent for 2 months. And that's why it kind of can get pushed out from, 6 weeks to 4 weeks. Under tip number 5 with the time frame, let's also talk about some resources for moving. So Zillow and Trulia are really great apps that I have on my phone. I mentioned them earlier about how I like to just randomly look and see what's available, even if I'm not actively searching. Facebook Marketplace is also one that I've found pretty useful in the past. Those are the 3 that I've probably used the most recently. Apartments.com is also a really good resource. And then way back in the day, and I don't know if people even really use this, I know I don't anymore, but I found the apartment that I moved in because of Craigslist in New York City, but I don't know how popular that really is anymore. And then the last thing is going directly to a building website. So I guess that's more applicable if you're looking to move in a certain neighborhood that you're already familiar with and you've seen some different buildings that kind of pique your interest. You could just go to the building website and apply. I did that for the place that I'm going to be moving into, but it was a recommendation from a coworker who used to live in that building. So that's how I got set up with that one. So those are my top 5 tips for apartment searching. And then I just have a couple miscellaneous things I wanted to talk about. So number 1 is don't pay for moving boxes. If you can go to any sort of retail store, literally any store, and ask them for boxes and they have extras that they would just throw out, they will give them to you for free. So it doesn't hurt to call around, I don't know, your Target, any type of stores like that, any retail store that you have near you. They get shipment in boxes and they just throw them out unless they're using them for other things, but most of the time they just throw them out. So don't spend money getting a moving kit from Home Depot or anything like that, or buying moving boxes off of Amazon. If you have the time and the ability to get boxes from point A to point B, definitely call any sort of store and get boxes for free. The next thing under miscellaneous is don't pack/move stuff that you don't want. So I think moving is a really good opportunity, and pre-moving, but you can do this while you're packing as well, but I never do, is to purge and kind of get rid of some things prior to your move date. So one of the things that I started this week was going through my apartment and kind of looking at either furniture pieces or miscellaneous decor or different things that I don't want anymore, and I won't be moving to my new apartment and listing them on Facebook Marketplace and selling them. I think that's a lot easier than getting to your new apartment and then figuring out, you know, what you want to keep and what you don't. And I think that that naturally would occur in a new space, but I try to do as much of it as I can proactively before I start packing. And the last thing is, don't buy furniture before you move. I did this mistake. My last apartment was a really small studio of about, I don't know, just over 300 square feet, really, really tiny. And I did buy some furniture pieces before moving into this apartment right here. And it only worked in my favor because I was going from a 300-foot studio to a 425 square foot one bedroom. But I definitely won't be buying any furniture before moving into my new place, just because you don't know if it's gonna fit, and then you have to deal with trying to return things. It's just way easier to see what your current space, your current furniture looks like in a new space before you decide to add anything. All right, guys, I hope that those tips for apartment searching helped you out. If you haven't seen the last video that I posted about why I'm moving, I will link that video down below for you guys to check out. And I will have a new video coming up this Sunday, probably talking about some of that moving process. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Have a good one. Bye.